Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm just going to talk about Venezuela right now. It's in the news right now of what's going on in the country in terms of its economy, and it's basically collapsed. And you've got a lot of people trying to survive in a collapsed economy, and you got a bunch of different things happening from the government's perspective, from the inflation rates to devaluation of currency, and just the overall stability of the economy. Now, this is only one perspective. You're more than apt to go out to IMF, Moody's, Fitch, any other site to kind of get an idea of the debt issues in Venezuela, the economy, the banking sector, inflation, and all that, to get a perspective from other people, what they're telling you what's going on there. And you can even speak to people in Canada that are of Venezuelan descent to tell you what's going on there. Here's a little bit about brief bio about myself. I got 25 years of experience from academia to industry to financial solutions. Now, my goal is to highlight issues facing countries' business, the economy. I also am about solutions, so I may talk a little bit about government policy, but I'm not here to criticize governments on all aspects of how they operate. What I will say is some of the risks that go into taking a certain policy stance and how that may impact certain aspects from inflation to the banking sector to investment. So I'll talk about GDP in Venezuela, I'll talk about government policy, I'll talk about the banking sector, I'll talk about lawsuits, and I'll talk about Venezuela trade with Canada. If you look at GDP in Venezuela, it's about 500 billion. Now, that being said, what that really means is 70% of the GDP in Venezuela is oil driven. So it's oil or bust in Venezuela. And since we've had issues with fallouts of Venezuela in terms of the oil pricing, they've been hammered heavily in terms of their GDP and just the overall economy. On top of that, we've had other issues with devaluation of currency, and hyperinflation happens because we've got shortage of goods and services there in China, because a lot of manufacturing operations have just shut down due to either limits to raw materials or just they're not productive or they can't make money at what they're doing there. So when we talk about government policies in general, it's not one policy attracts business investment. It's a multitude of things. And Venezuela is one of those countries in general that their policies are driving the lack of foreign direct investment. And when you do that, you're actually hurting your business, because then you're relying on internal cash from the banking sector within those countries or owners to invest. And that's hard to do if you're trying to do multi-billion-dollar operations where you need the capital to expand them. And that's something that's very difficult when you're starting to deal with this, because they have basically nationalized a lot of the industries there. So when you're a foreign entity, do you really want to go deal with a government that could nationalize your industry, or their policies are so restrictive that you really can't do too much in terms of expanding a business opportunity? And that's something you need to bear in mind here, and that's what this slide's telling you. Second thing is, by government policies in terms of almost like socialism that they're doing here, they've created shortage. Inflation rates really go up because there's pressure, either from a currency perspective or shortages. We could see close to 1,000 inflation rate within the next 6 to 8 months. Well, that's significant. That means these people are struggling to feed themselves, struggling to buy the bare essentials. And this is what's facing Venezuela right now. The second point is their unemployment rate is likely going to get up to 21%. So almost 1/4 of the Venezuela workforce is unemployed. The good thing is, in a roundabout way, their debt to GDP is at 50%, but that's likely to grow because government deficits are going to increase. And as I said before earlier, 70% of their economy is oil reserves. Banking sector. Okay. In general, the banking sectors, when you look at it, you look at the balance sheet. And Venezuela's balance sheet is worsening as we go through this period of economic uncertainty, and you're seeing that they've actually had to sell off some of their gold reserves to pay down their debt, because they cannot purchase the cash that's required because they don't have the money to do it. And so what they've done is they've really gone into their gold reserves to basically pay off some of their debts. So that's part of the problem when you start dealing with exports and imports coming into the country, especially the import side. You have to pay that in your currency. If your currency is devalued, you don't even have the money to pay for those goods and services as part of the overall trade. Other issues. In the past, it was unheard of for companies to sue other governments, especially Venezuela. Now, not unheard of that way, because whenever you have protection agreements like FIFA, which are foreign investment protection agreements in place, then you have the ability to sue. And when you get into countries like Cuba and Venezuela, to sue them, it was never really an option there. Now, lately, through the World Bank, companies like ExxonMobil and Crystalex were able to be successful in their lawsuits with the Venezuelan government. What does it mean? On purpose, they've got a lawsuit. Will they be able to settle it? It's hard to tell. When you deal with a government that's cash-strapped now, they're likely not going to do anything, But what that does for Venezuela over the long term, if they're trying to attract foreign direct investment, companies are going to look at this as say, you know what, you're not open for business, so why would I go into your country? And that just hurts the overall growth of an economy in Venezuela, and that's what you're seeing. I just want to talk briefly about Canada. Canada deals with Venezuela two-way trade, about $1.5 billion. The bulk of that is imports, and really realistically it's mostly all oil that we import there. What we ship to them is a lot of grains, so that's for them making their bread, cereals, and stuff like that in Venezuela. Now, this is a little old, but the perspective is still there. So what am I trying to say here? Well, Canada deals with them. It hasn't grown significantly, so that any impact in Venezuela's collapse won't have a significant impact on exports or imports to Canada, because Venezuela's trade is not that high compared to other trading partners. Now, let's stop there for 30 seconds and talk. We are going through a period of economic growth that's slower than we've seen in the 90s. Now, some of that's a demographic shift. Some of it's also the changing of the powers. Where China was going through a considerable amount of growth, it's half of where it was probably a decade ago. New world powers are coming up as we see development in India, Africa, and all that, but they're not up there to help stray that global growth number. So that's part of one of the issues you're facing. Second thing is, socialism at all cost doesn't work. As much as people will try to tell you as they're going to make you have free education, free roads, free transit, whatever, somebody has to pay for that. And somebody paying for that is usually the private sector. So socialism at all costs doesn't work. Government intervention to the point into an economy where they state-own the industry doesn't work either. You cannot modernize them, you can't get productivity, you can't attract a foreign direct investment. So that's another critical aspect too as well when you start talking about government intervention in policy. The reason why I wanted to cover that off is Venezuela is a key indicator that it was a very wealthy country at one point. It was one of the darlings of the Latin America. Now look at it in terms of its government policies over the last 2-3 years. That shows you what we're heading for. And it's not just in Venezuela. We're seeing the issues in Brazil, Argentina as well, and even in Colombia we're seeing that. Even Mexico we're seeing where reforms have not been far enough in terms of government intervention, tax policies, regulations. All that is part of the overall things, because for decades we've always known about hyperinflation that usually was in Latin America, and you're seeing that come back again because of the way government's trying to control industry. That's not going to work long term if you're trying to bring in free market reforms to help grow an economy, to stabilize it. And this is what this presentation was to kind of tell you about. Really tell you about socialism at all costs does not work. People can sell it to you, but it doesn't work. And that's what you really need to research when you're listening to any of these people from a social type of left-wing view on policy. That's what they're going to try to sell you on. They're going to tell you, I'm going to give you a handout. Giving you a handout means they take it from somebody else. And that does nothing in terms of productivity. It does nothing about moving the dynamics of an economy forward. It doesn't do much to bring sustainability to program spending as well. And that's very critical as you start looking at factors that are going to drive your ability to succeed in your life. And that's something you need to ask questions. What is government going to do for me in terms of the overall strategy to get me gainful employment to succeed in a career in terms of things? They're not there to hold your hand through everything, but they have to bring in a balance of policies, and that's something you need to ask as you're moving forward when you hear the debate on government policy. Thank you.